It was not a quiet night for the residents of Russia. Drones attacked energy facilities in the Volgograd region. A fire broke out at the Balashevskaya electrical substation. The local governor had to make excuses, claiming that drone debris had fallen and caught fire and that repair crews were restoring the power supply. Numerous explosions also kept the residents of Saratov and the region awake. Special operations forces struck the Saratov oil refineries. This is one of the oldest Russian oil refining enterprises, which is part of the Rosneft oil company structure. The industrial zone also came under attack. Locals reported fires. Drones also attacked Engels, where a strategic aviation airbase is located, and paralyzed the operation of the local Gakari airport. The Russian Ministry of Defense reported heroically. 12 drones were shot down over the region. Ukrainian intelligence shared some interesting statistics. In October, for the first time in a long while, Russia was forced to purchase 35,000 tons of sulfur abroad. This raw material is needed for the production of explosives. Previously, it was mainly produced at domestic oil refineries. Its import is a clear signal of deep problems in the energy sector of the aggressor country. Targeted strikes on Russia's energy sector are the shortest path to bringing Moscow to the negotiating table. This is the opinion of top Western analysts with whom Dmytro Anopchenko spoke.
Not to persuade, not to threaten with sanctions, which Moscow will try to circumvent anyway, but to intensify long-range strikes on Russia's energy sector. This is exactly what our top expert considers the most realistic way to force the Kremlin to negotiate.
This is what Ukrainians should be doing right now. Rely on your strengths, not by throwing 600 to 700,000 soldiers onto the front line, but by using operational command, including against Russia's oil industry. Such strikes are incredibly effective.
Mr. Gordon is a respected figure among the military. His latest book, Wars of Chemical Battles, became a global bestseller. He spent almost a quarter of a century in the army. He rose through the ranks from junior lieutenant to colonel. For many years, he led NATO's elite unit, the Rapid Response Battalion for Biological and Nuclear Threats. He witnessed the transformation of modern soldiers. And he says it is drones that are now capable of changing them even more.
On average, it turns out that Ukrainians have destroyed about 20% of Russia's fuel production and processing capacities, which are needed, among other things, for domestic consumption. Open social media and you'll see long lines of cars, drivers trying to refuel. If there is any gasoline at all, and this not only brings Moscow foreign currency from selling the resource abroad, but also affects the lives of ordinary people, and they are the only ones who can influence what Putin and the Kremlin will do next.
Colonel Gordon believes that the psychological effect is no less important than the blow to the economy, because throughout all the years of the war, Russians have never really felt it. For them, the fighting was always somewhere far away, mostly just on television. And that's why there was no condemnation of what is called in Russia the special military operation.
When drones appear over Moscow, when airports are shut down, it has a significant impact on ordinary Russians who are still trying to take a late vacation. And this affects society much more than other actions Ukraine could take.
So even if Ukraine were to receive the missiles, but the US maintained restrictions on the targets that could be struck. And since any American administration tries to avoid escalation with Moscow, the colonel sees a way to use the missiles without crossing red lines. Because no one in Washington is restricting the use of American weapons supplied to Ukraine for strikes in Donbass and Crimea.
Ukrainians have already destroyed several key air defense radars in Crimea, so the Kerch Bridge is almost certainly the next target. A good opportunity to clear the way. Any pinpoint strikes behind the Russian front line are vital. And the fact that Ukrainians have more and more opportunities to do this is excellent. And it leads me to think that American intelligence, perhaps not publicly, is working at full capacity.
That is, the path to negotiations, if not to peace, then at least to a ceasefire. Many Western analysts now see it as necessary for Russia to realize that it cannot win this war and therefore must stop. And strikes like the ones we are witnessing now make this clear both to ordinary Russians, who are being assured on television that everything is supposedly under control, and to the Kremlin, for whom the loss of energy facilities is extremely sensitive and painful. They make it clear that even at the front, Moscow has no real ability to seize more territory. In other words, a kind of forced return to reality as a means of compelling peace.
The Russians can now capture 500 meters or a kilometer in the morning, but by the afternoon they lose it again because at the front they have poorly trained conscripts and they still haven't established proper logistics to support their troops. Somewhere they manage to break through, focusing on a single section, but they quickly run out of ammunition and strength. The idea is that the Russian army has probably reached the limit of its ability to advance on the front or is very close to it.
And the sooner this becomes obvious, not only to NATO analysts, the more likely real negotiations will be. Even Trump, who previously genuinely believed that Russia was much stronger on the front, is now gradually changing his mind. Yes, he is still bargaining with Moscow and still makes the delivery of Tomahawks dependent on the Kremlin's willingness to negotiate. But after half a year of illusions in the corridors of power in Washington, this wind of change is now gradually being felt as well. In terms of attitudes, not yet in terms of policy, but at least in terms of approaches. And that's why it's so interesting to see how tomorrow's conversation at the White House will unfold. Reporting from Washington, Dmytro Anopchenko, Serhiy Koval, American Bureau of Inter TV Channel, United News Marathon.
Russia continues mobilization in temporarily occupied Crimea. And despite the fact that the Kremlin has not officially announced new waves, it still finds other ways to drag people into the war. According to the Center for National Resistance, employees of public institutions, medical workers, and even people looking for jobs are at risk. The occupation administrations are forcing employers to submit lists of potential recruits. In particular, the Kremlin is betting not on open mobilization, but on contracts, and is therefore creating such. On the peninsula, conditions are being created so that men are forced to go to war. Find out what a Crimean partisan told our correspondent Karina Podlinko and how people are being lured in this report.
For the year 2025, the occupiers have indeed set themselves a rather ambitious target of 1,636 people. And it is widely known that as of today's date, this particular target has regrettably been barely met by a mere 58%. They did manage by various means to convince people to sign contracts and mobilize 963 individuals.
The numbers cited by Lipa, spokesperson for the Center of National Resistance, refer to this so-called plan. In practice, there is no official mobilization in temporarily occupied Crimea. For the first time during the full-scale invasion, it was announced in the fall of 2022. However, due to public panic, the occupiers changed their strategy, says our interlocutor, the Crimean partisan Masander.
Instead of mobilizing the population, they decided to simply buy them off. In other words, they decided to buy off the poor either with money or at least with promises. Secondly, they decided not to provoke panic, at least as much as you can call it that among the intelligentsia. They simply decided to take all the marginalized people who are there, even to the point of emptying out the prisons. I even know of cases where people were taken from psychiatric hospitals, people with financial difficulties, those who owed child support payments. Because in Crimea, they're quite strict about that. In exchange for financial or actual physical freedom, you serve a certain term, and after that, it's considered that, so to speak, you've been cleansed. Well, let's put it this way. 90% go for the money, and only about 5 to 7% are ideologically motivated. The rest are out of their minds, who have no idea what they're doing there. Some voice told them, or maybe they dreamed about Putin.
There are contract signings. In some places, the contract signings happen in such a way that certain enterprises are given a quota for the number of people they have to recruit. They announce on Telegram channels that they pay over 2 million rubles, which is a lot. Previously, there was no information about this. That's about $40,000. Obviously, people are signing up. That's what their mobilization is based on money, on the fact that people simply have nowhere else to earn a living.
Recruitment or so-called recruit centers have been set up in every region of Crimea. There, in addition to a base salary of 40,000 rubles, they promise huge bonuses of up to 200,000. But most of these bonuses exist only on paper.
They also have various beneficial programs where the city can effectively allocate financial funds to those individuals who bravely go to war. The occupation administrations can also create their own additional programs, apart from the federal ones, to support those who have now decided to mobilize their efforts.
At best, this money is partially paid out after signing the contract, when the man is still in training and he immediately pays off his debts. In the worst case, they just cheat you out of the money. They simply stay silent and pay nothing until you start raising a fuss. And that's if it's not already too late. Because the life expectancy of such recruits depends on where they're sent. Sometimes they're sent to conditions where people don't survive even 2 weeks.
There are also cases where the war immediately lands them on the front line. But that's the exception, not the rule. Yes, they are trained in various camps. The entire coast of the Azov Sea that's occupied is, for example, full of training camps. Just imagine the Rostov region, large camps for training and distributing these contract soldiers. They train them in different ways. Sometimes they train them for 2 weeks, sometimes for a month, sometimes for 3 weeks. Sometimes they stay there even longer.
They deceive the conscripts in the same way. At first, they say they'll serve in the rear, but then they send them to the front line.
If earlier conscripts were just painting grass somewhere, now they are essentially the rear for those on the front line. Besides, the rear is a very relative concept. This is yet another trap where they promise you'll be almost on the 30th line of defense, but in reality you're sitting just 7 kilometers from the line of combat. If they see that you support the regime, they start offering you a contract. Of course, they don't warn you that as soon as you sign the contract, the state then has every right to send you not 7 kilometers but 7 meters from the line of combat. And usually you don't live long.
According to the Office of the President of Ukraine in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, since the beginning of the occupation in 2014, Russia has illegally conducted 21 conscription campaigns on the peninsula, during which at least 53,000 people have been drafted into the ranks of the Russian armed forces. On October 1st, the 22nd campaign began on the peninsula, which will last until December 31st, with an unknown number of conscripts. Karina Podlinko, Pavlo Bondarenko and Vadim Verbat, Rada TV channel for the summary program Jedini Holovene.